Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Off Angle. We are rolling through the episodes, of course. Really excited to keep going on with these, and we've got a good one. We've got a good one coming up because we've just had some pretty perfect timing. Of course, I'll get straight into the announcement of Counter-Strike 2, which we touched on a little bit last episode. You know, where it was going, when it was going to be coming, what we wanted to see, maybe what we expected to see. And we actually have an awful lot to go over. Before we get into it, though, I will introduce our guest for today, and that is going to be Paladin, who is joining us over there in the top left. You get to be the first one on the non-overlay, just recording Discord casualness. So we'll kick off with a very nice, how are you doing, Paladin?
I'm bubbling with excitement right now. It is like better than Christmas Day. It is just like the amount of details and kind of I don't even know. Like there's just so much to talk about and there's just so much to get into. I'm just so excited where the game's going. I mean, the fear of the unknown has completely melted away now that we've actually got something tangible in front of us. And I'm excited to dive into every little bit of a detail because I mean, dude, they've got they've got like liquid in the Molotovs now. Like how cool is that?
Yeah. It's all looking sick. It's all looking sick. I think Twitter exploded. I just kind of came back from the gym, came back from eating after the gym and whatnot. Went on Twitter, and I think I just missed the initial like 5 minutes of it, but I came back and everyone's like, oh my god, it's happening, and all this kind of shit. Holy shit was a pretty common one, of course. So big announcements. It's all official. We did have the sort of tease from Richard, which unfortunately opened up a Pandora's box of baits. Everyone seemed to know something. They were involved, they were away. There was obviously a playtest that kind of happened that we got teased a little bit, etc, etc. So it was a very confusing time for a while. We obviously touched on, is it going to be Counter-Strike 2? Is it going to be just a Source 2 upgrade? Seems like it's both. I think before we get into it, maybe if you are living under a rock on this one, maybe you're not on Twitter as much. I don't know. But they've released 3 videos. One that is about map revamp, one that is about tick rate, or indeed the now absolution of that, and one is about smoke changes, right? Pretty sure we're going to be getting a few more videos that come up to give us a taste of what's to come from the game, but that is essentially what we've been given, and obviously with that comes the idea of a new look to the game. It's on a new engine, there's a new UI, etc, etc. So really cool to see that Valve have obviously put themselves fully into this and not just going to allow things to bait over for a while, to simmer or whatever, and then suddenly we get a release of the game and it's like, oh, what's going on with this? And everyone, I'm sure that would also be very exciting, but it's nice to get some tease, it's nice to get some actual tangible information, and maybe they will be monitoring the community feedback, and maybe some changes come into the game soon. But as well, another thing that I suppose is worth mentioning is the playtest, which is going to be on an invite basis, but a pretty loose invite basis, is actually, I believe, ready to go this evening, is what I've heard. Not from any sources or anything, but just from kind of watching a little bit. We have some further information, if you are maybe this is where you might not be super ear to the ground. On the ESL Pro League broadcast, they had a few of the talent that went away to the playlist. The NDA is now lifted, and they talked quite extensively about what we can expect and some of the changes coming to the game, and maybe some of the criticisms that they had as well coming into things. So that pretty much sums it up. I think I'm very excited to sink our teeth into this one, fellas. I know Pronogo has a few things to say about it, so we'll maybe hold off on the sort of criticism of it at this point. Let's kick off.
You gotta keep me at an arm's length.
Yeah, right. Like, just for a little bit. I think we're all
the Debbie Downer.
Very excited that it is being released at the same time. So if we start with some of the positives, then I think one of the biggest things that is going to be a change to what we work on, the competitive side, is that smoke change. The idea that you can now shoot through smokes and it dissipates it. You can nade pretty much an entire smoke and it disappears. So creating gaps in it, maybe now the idea of smoke spamming is going to be done away with, right? Or at the very least, it'll be a very different beast. So that's something that I think they have probably seen develop over the past year plus, and not been too happy with, which I, for one, am a really big fan of this smoke change.
Yeah, I thought that now at this point nades become like a must buy. Like we used to have like a ranking of like smoke flash or smoke molly flash nade. Now nade just shoots up in that kind of like importance ranking because if you're on both sides, I'd much rather have a nade to counteract the smoke in comparison to two flashes, right? So
Yes.
I think that change in and of itself is crazy that we're having that big of a shakeup and changing that tier list. It's unfathomable. So I think that alone kind of makes me excited to see how the dynamic shifts and how the priority shifts for because again it's another extra $100, so there's also that to factor in. I know it's just a small little thing, but it can all add up, and I think that paired with that fact that it does damage still, like that's just really awesome to see that the nades are just way more important now.
It does mean that essentially standing inside of a smoke and like holding for the fade is pretty much out now because you can shoot through it to maybe spot somebody and you can nade it to completely dissipate it. What I think this change is primarily targeted at, even though it's going to have massive reverberations throughout Counter-Strike's competitive community, this is clearly a target at matchmaking at the pub level, at like the more casual level. You can tell just because it makes smokes more interactable by the average Joe. Now you don't need to practice your lineups through smoke like on instinct like the pros do. You don't need to do all of that extra mechanical and strategic legwork in order to have a fighting chance at combating smoke play. So basically it makes the tool less oppressive in the lower ranks, which you can argue is going to be great for the competitive side, or the casual side rather, and maybe it's going to have mixed effects on the competitive side. In fact, I would not be surprised if, as competitive CS2 starts to take off, we just see less reliance on smokes in general. And as a result, we might actually see some maps completely open up. Like you think about Nuke, where T's need those smokes in order to actually cross to secret. I think we're in for another CT-sided, revamp, I guess, of that particular map. And maybe it's no surprise that they ended up making some more significant changes to a map like Nuke, although maybe it was only on the visual side from what I was reading. I have a feeling we're going to see some sort of second and third order consequences of this change that basically make any smoke heavy map, any smoke heavy strat far less likely to actually succeed. Now it's not just you have to learn the lineups, but it's also that you have to relearn the lineups on Nuke because they changed the art, by the way. So that's going to be a significant component. But on top of that, you have to actually like figure out how to guard the smoke almost like it's a resource or a teammate. It's like, how can I save my smoke from being blown up or something? And at the very least, I mean, you can get into all of these, like, if they do this, then I'll do that. Like if I hear the HE go, then maybe I know the guy's in this position, I can try to spam him or something. But for the most part, it's going to completely change the playing field of how you interact with smokes. And honestly, I think it's going to lead to better gameplay anyway, because that means that you're going to spend more of your time actually shooting other players instead of, shooting through utility and stuff, which is something I've personally been checked out for ever since Vertigo was added, when they were just spamming through the wooden panels before they turned it into metal. It's like, I don't think that's really interesting. I think it's much better if we have some way to shoot around smokes, then that definitely solves the problem.
I think there was a world where we were reaching kind of the pinnacle of CS in terms of we're gonna completely save in a lot of these scenarios. We're gonna play very slow, methodical
Yes,
CS.
yeah.
We're gonna have these walls up. I mean, smokes were really treated as walls, and pushing through the smokes weren't really uh, the best move, so to speak. And now I feel like this is finally a change that could potentially revert us back to the start of something new, and we actually have like a vastly different meta. And I think we can go back to a very scrappy type of CS where you are dueling a lot more. And I didn't think that it was possible, especially after we got like Anubis that came out, and you could already see like a meta evolving there, and kind of how people were like learning that map so much more quickly in comparison to all the other maps that came before. I was like, how do we innovate at all at this point if this is kind of the pace that pros are on? Which is cool. It's awesome that teams and organizations and analysts are all so up to date on that kind of stuff to get that caught up. But this is something that isn't going to take weeks. It's going to take months to really understand what the ideal structure to go about these smokes are. I think executes are completely different now because now the smokes wrap around the actual structures, right? So you could have a world where you might not even need an extra smoke on a specific part of the map, but at that point, even with the smokes going down on those spots, is it even viable to throw the smokes in the first place because they can get spammed through and leave open spaces? Like there's just so many possibilities, and there's never going. And this another thing is that this could open up so many different styles of play, right? You could have a team that wants to spam a lot more and take those aim duels a little bit more and spam those smokes. Or you could have a team like I'm guessing the outsiders might just like to play it as like a wall type situation where they don't spam through it and they like to use it to more get around nooks and crannies. And I think that allows the game to be more dynamic at the pro level as well. So there's just so many things, so many ramifications off of this one thing that just makes me really excited for the pro scene, because I think that this could just radically change how we approach the game altogether. The rankings and everything will just be completely upended.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is kind of crazy. I think just to sort of reverberate your point, we were maybe getting to a level in Counter-Strike Go, as I guess we're going to have to differentiate between the two for a little while, you know. But we were getting to a point where it felt like maybe things were almost solved, you know, that we are now in a meta where I think there's a couple things in there. One is the saving. On some maps, you know, it really has just changed the game into this super high percentage. If we don't find the round, then unlucky, and not relying on, you know, your skill as a pro player. You rely on the team play. You rely on maybe some of those 50-50s going your way. You know, the nade that lands that allows a dink to come through as an insta-kill makes all the difference, right? Which is a really, really minute kind of thing that, you know, Valve probably aren't the biggest fans of. And I think that we want to move the game back towards being, again, a fight-heavy game, something that involves this kind of dueling, the maybe not always 1v1ing, but I think that they clearly want to increase the amount of fights that you have to take, and make sure that, you know, it's not just falling back into a very safe kind of numbers-based game. And then the other thing as well is the smoke spamming, right? Which I think is now going to change massively with these smokes coming in. And again, it's for a while it was a problem because people were getting killed through smokes. Now they have learned, but you're still able to hold off a line for a good while. You know, look at Overpass, right? A smoke goes down and an A1S clip goes in, or magazine, you know, to be technical. And then the next time the smoke comes in, and again, the A1S is there to defend. And it makes it very difficult for the first sort of minute of Overpass on that T side to really do anything over towards B, right? Unless you go really, really fast, and then again, you're playing around these 50-50 fights that are maybe based on spawns or based on your flash being absolutely perfect versus being just good and only blinding a player for 3 seconds instead of 4, right? So there are all these kinds of things, I think, that are going to obviously be done away with, and I think they were also things that were maybe holding Go back, and making the gameplay. I do feel the past sort of 6 months or so, it's a point that I've made before, but the past 6 months or so, especially since the major, maybe it feels like, have been kind of stale, right? And some of the gameplay has been a hell of a lot slower, a hell of a lot yeah, methodical is the nice way of putting it. You know, we're all sort of broadcasters here, and methodical is a word that we'll use to just kind of explain slow and not very much going on. And there is, right, this is the thing. It's like, if you look, you'll find, if you go deep enough in, there is things going on. But again, it comes down to just such minute detail that it can make the game a little bit boring at times to watch, right? Unless you are one of these viewers that goes in, you know, again, like us, that goes in looking for all these little things and all the little changes. And wow, I've not seen that flash used in that way before, is you know, where we can maybe find fun. So it feels like, for the competitive side of the game as well, I'm going on here. I think that this is a change that needed to come in around this time. You know, we're going to have one more major on this cycle, and then past that, it'll be a brand new game, I think, is what Valve are going to be looking for, right? And maybe we'll get a bit more information around the major. Maybe we'll get a deep. Obviously, there's this play test going on, but it'd be nice if we can get like a fully fledged beta that everyone can get involved in. And that is obviously a big just sort of game change around the market and everything that is really popular at the moment as a sort of marketing idea, is get the beta out there and get as many people on it as you possibly can. And hopefully that'll be a good way for them to continue building hype, because I think they've built hype very well. But yeah, this smoke change feels like it was needed. Smokes are maybe the one thing that don't get as much innovation as compared to other nades, right? A flash being, as I kind of mentioned, you know, like, for example, I've noticed a change at the level that I commentate with the window flash, right? The flash that I use in matchmaking is now antiquated. You know, it's a flash, but and it's just slightly further to the right than where the lineup was, right? And I think that I think, again, you can't really know what the pros are fully using it for, but I think that allows the peak to come in easier at the top of Banana, and it blinds more areas. Another one that's a great example is the antenna flash on Inferno is from Coffin, right, peeking in towards B. Again, is now kind of antiquated. That one was there years ago. It's maybe one of, Fallen's flashes and stuff. He's got a couple on that map that people first saw him using, and now the flash is thrown from a bit further behind, and you jump throw it and whatnot. And again, you would assume that is because it gives it slightly more airtime, or it pops higher, so it covers a bit of a wider space. Maybe it gets the guy who's hiding behind car sometimes, or hiding behind the barrels, whatever it's called, car. So I think that they're obviously wanting to change things up here and keep it. Well, not just keep it fresh, but completely change the way that the smokes work, because they felt like the one thing that have not really changed all that much. You can have a variation on the lineup, but it lands in the same place, or you can have maybe a slight variation in the landing place, but it ultimately does the same job. And now they're going to be very, very different, and we may see a small change could mean that the smoke, for example, using Mirage as an example, covers off connector. Well, actually, it sort of covers in connector and that whole area, and you've got a smoke that's sort of, on both sides of the doorway. Or you could have a slight variation, and you've got a smoke that lands firmly in front of it and does a similar job, but gives a bigger space to work with, right? Because this is another thing. I think the term that they're very quickly coining here is volumetric smokes. And when they're thrown on the ground, they actually don't cover as much. They're a bit sort of longer, not quite as high. That's what we're seeing so far, right? We've only got like, a minute of footage to really work off, and about 5-second snippets on each map. But it does feel like this change is going to come in, and it's going to bring that variation in executes, that variation in approach, and really, again, pick up the fighting that goes on, right? Because you might decide to spam through initially and move. You might get a nade to counter particular executes. Maybe that's part of the plan, that it's like, there'll be the follow-on effect of all these changes coming in. So I'm really excited for this, and I think that the smoke change is going to have massive, massive repercussions at the top level of the game.
What do we think about the colored smokes? I did notice this, that some of them are bluish and some of them are yellowish, to signify that it's a CT smoke and a T smoke. I didn't like that personally, because I like that if a smoke is dropped, you don't know who threw it, and you have to be aware you have to be aware if your teammate had thrown it, and you calm that over. That's like an important communication tool, and it could completely change how you perceive a round playing out if you know the colors. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, it also depends on, is it tied to the equipment or the player who's throwing it? Because if it's tied to the equipment, it kind of makes sense, but that also means that if you drop, like say you die as a T and you drop your smoke, and then a CT picks up your smoke and throws it.
Right,
If that has to also match, like in my mind as a designer, I would make that consistent, because that's a T smoke as opposed to a CT smoke or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I'm not sure how much of a huge impact it would have, but I'm generally not a fan of, like, I mean, I guess this is just an extension of the art style. They've definitely simplified the visuals, right? It looks a lot more like
100%, yeah.
like Fortnite or a Valorant or whatever. It's much more of the, like, everybody's got their bright shiny color palette, and the vibrance is turned up or whatever. And like I don't know if you guys watched that little Molotov little GIF that they have, or WebM or whatever, on the page, but it's like got bloom super turned up. I'm sure people will turn that off when they actually play the game. And so like stuff like that, is very different. I don't really know what's up with the smoke stuff. I guess the reason why they might have wanted to change it, if I can try to think about it, is because now you can dissipate the smoke in weird ways with gunfire and stuff. Maybe that would cause confusion if it wasn't color coded to tell you whose smoke it was. So like then if your teammate throws a smoke, you probably don't want to shoot through that one, because it'll kind of mess it up. But I also feel like, kind of with you there, it doesn't really matter. Like, surely good players will just know that, and they don't need to be like have it spelled out for them. So it kind of seems like a meaningless change to me. I don't know what the purpose would have been. I'm trying to reach for like a potential conclusion as to what Valve was thinking, but so far nothing's coming up. I don't know if you have anything else in mind, Scriv.
The only thing I can really think is that it's maybe, you talk about communication and good players. It might be a change that's in there, as a sort of friendly, casual change, that it's like, because
help. Yeah.
I
Or
would
maybe a
say like
broadcast
MM.
change, like for spectators, right?
Possible,
Yeah.
possible. That might be something down to it. You know, it might just be on. Well, I guess what we're gonna call it can't be Go TV. 2TV? That doesn't. 2TV doesn't really
Two
sound
TV
too good.
doesn't sound right. Maybe it'll be
surely.
CS2.
Surely it's just got to be Counter-Strike TV. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, the only thought that I really have is that maybe it's down for, you know, the sort of lower levels or whatever where communication doesn't really happen as much. People just sort of throw smokes a bit willy-nilly. So, you know, yeah, and I do think you raise a good point that it's like with the whole spamming thing, you probably want to know if it's a teammate smoke or not, because you know, I don't know, it's hard to picture because we're like well read enough in the game to know that a CT smoke goes down as a defensive tool, and then a T smoke goes down as a bit more of an offensive thing. So why would they be in the same place as well?
Right.
You know, it's things like that. It's a little bit hard to picture, but I don't know. Maybe just a nice, again, to open the game up, give it a bit more color and a bit more vibrance, because I think it is maybe something where it's like, oh, you don't know whose smoke that is. It can confuse comms, right? But most of the time, I think the smokes are pretty self-explanatory. So it's kind of one of those arguments where it's like, is it needed? Isn't it needed? So therefore, it doesn't really matter if it's in the game so much. But I also, I don't know. We could be reading into it a bit wrong. This is where, you know, the speculation keeps opening up.
Yeah.
It looks like it's a CTT thing, but it might be down to the map they're on. It might be down, you know what I mean? Because I think some of the
could be like lighting.
yeah. Some of the bluer ones appeared on like Nuke when they showed that. Some of the yellow ones showed on Mirage, which is like more dusty and open and natural light or whatever.
That could be the case. You know what?
So, yeah.
My overall macro view of this is just that I am really shocked that this is a change that they went for. Because even though I think it's got a lot of positive ramifications, we get back into scrappy gunfights and duels, and like, you know, just the fact that you can interact with this tool, you have options when somebody smokes you off that aren't sit in the smoke and hopefully you win the coin toss, you know, smoke bug fade or whatever. Like, no, you actually have some skill based and intuition based plays you can make through the smoke itself as learning and mastering the mechanics of how it works now. And I think that's really good. But if you ask me, if you polled the average player, are they going to rework smokes? Maybe to fix the bugs, but like beyond that, I don't think anybody would have expected changes, right? So they're really shocking stuff. And, you know, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it in action, especially at a high level when people have started to figure it out. As Paladin says, it's going to take many months now, maybe even years to really crack the code of like what CS2's optimal sort of play pattern is. And who knows how many changes Valve themselves are going to do. That's the other thing too, is we have to wonder, are Valve going to start getting more hands-on? Something that I feel like not very many people are acutely aware of. Counter-Strike 2 is going to be the only game Valve actually made. Hidden Path made Go. A Source and a bunch of other stuff was made by like modders and, you know, or like backported or whatever from 1.6. It's like, this is their first actual Counter-Strike game, guys. It's called Counter-Strike 2. It's their first one. So like, I don't know, man. That's just, it's kind of funny, but that also means maybe they'll become a little bit more possessive of actually making changes. Like the fact that they've now bought community maps like Anubis and Tuscan, for example, that in and of itself kind of shows like that's the first time they've done that in a while. And even then it was like FM Pwn still was updating cache for a bit. And, you know, obviously they haven't taken the new version in, but it's like now they're not even allowing the old mappers to edit Anubis, for example, right? They bought the rights to it. So like now it's Valve's map. So that it's kind of like a different style of them running things a little bit. And all I can hope for is that, you know, fingers crossed, they don't meddle too much in it and they just let us play with the new sort of sandbox that they've created for us. And that allows us to figure out, okay, is this actually, you know, is there a mechanic that's too powerful or too weak that should receive some balance updates? Or is it just we need to find a use for it in the meta? Because that's something that, for example, my home game of Brood War has been known for, hasn't received a balance update since 2001, guys. And people are still finding new metas and new strategies and making new maps and all that stuff. So if Counter-Strike can enter into some similar paradigm, then that will be great. But obviously the track record of developers, broadly speaking, is not to do that. They do like to meddle. They do like to edit and change stuff. So we'll have to see what the actual sort of vision for what Counter-Strike is going to be comes from Valve at. Like, what does that really look like? I'm excited because at the very least, it's going to be something different. And as you guys were both saying earlier, the Counter-Strike state right now in terms of the current meta is really not super, like, it's certainly not my favorite. I'll put it to you that way, right? I really like the idea of going back to a bit more of an aggressive move, and a duelist heavy move, or something to that effect, where you can actually take fights and maybe the maps reflect that in any design updates they might get. I guess confirming the map updates, it was Overpass and, well, I think they showed Italy or something, which is a little bit
Yeah,
weird.
it looked
Yeah.
like Italy,
It looked like
which is
Italy's like
odd.
market or whatever. But Overpass has been updated, like actually updated, not just lighting or whatever. So it looked like they changed bathrooms somewhat significantly, and maybe even the approach to monster and stuff. So we don't
Connector
have too
looks
many
completely
details.
different.
Yeah, yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do, and that's also going to allow us to build some understanding of what the actual vision of CS is for Valve now. And now they're actually imparting their vision wholesale instead of outsourcing it to Hidden Path or whatever. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up.
I guess that honestly ties into how the EPL casters were discussing their time in Seattle, where they were very like, yeah, if you thought that Valve don't care about us or doesn't want to talk
Mm.
about it, it's completely wrong. Like they were all hounding over us and like clapping, cheering for us while we were playing, taking down
Okay.
notes, asking us questions, and saying super interactive. And I think that just really bodes well for the future because I mean, the happy medium that I'd like is they do take in all of this feedback. They are constantly hounding. They ask for, player feedback, creator feedback, and the casual feedback, I guess, and kind of compile it together and then give us regular updates rather than changing every so often and just kind of seeing what happens. Like I'd rather have this type of an approach where I mean they are very willing to pay attention to everybody. And I think the one issue that we had with Valve before where I've heard so many different stories of like, Thor and Richard Lewis when Valve would send an agent over to a major, they would have a conversation with them and they kind of just like brush them off and
Yeah.
not really take any of their points into consideration. If that can change, if that can shift, which I'm thinking it will just because of how much more easier it is to use Source 2 as an engine,
Yeah.
Yes.
it'll
Yeah.
just be more easier to push updates to be a little bit more dynamic when reactions happen in the community in the pro scene when a bug is spotted. It could probably get patched up quicker than usual. You might not have a full event where there is like an odd pixel boost that would happen. It could just be disappear. You could just disappear and have a hot fix immediately the day after or something like that. Like all of these possibilities are viable now if they are this willing to listen. Of course, it's just the opening stages of
Yes. Yeah.
this new game, and of course they might be all hands on deck for right now. But it's really a question of what are they going to do 3 months, 6 months from now? How are they going to approach the second major of the year? How are they going to approach 2024? Like all of these things need to start somewhere, and I guess these opening remarks from Valve brings me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you brought up Thorin earlier, and when I had him on my game development channel for an interview, one of the things I had asked him about is what he wanted to see or what he saw as a common flaw with how developers approach esports and their specific competitive titles. And one of the things he said was that the developers don't necessarily need to be pro players or pro caliber players. They just need to be grounded in the game, is the phrase he used. And it's
Right.
like true. It's like, if you're at least playing the game and you're like you were saying, Paladin, earlier, just watching other people play the game and really asking them questions and being interactive and engaged, then that's going to go a long way, not just to community goodwill as a marketing stint, but also as actually giving you the right data to draw from so that you can make correct decisions for embodying whatever your vision of the game actually is. And, figuring out what skills you want to test. Clearly, they didn't want to test, spamming through smokes as a skill. They've removed that part of the game now. And now it's going to be more about like interacting with the smoke as a piece of utility. And then what can you do to counteract it or remove it entirely if you're going to use an HE, for example. So I definitely think there's a lot to be said about just having a bit more of an engaged developer as long as they are actually playing the game. Like a lot of the problems that I see about modern competitive titles is they recognize that the people who are playing it at a high level are so far beyond them, but that means that they just kind of give up entirely on the idea that they're going to play and enjoy the game that they're actually making. So it's really confusing. Like, you look at League of Legends or probably even Valorant, which admittedly I don't follow too much of. It's like the changes come in and they change so much of the game so as to create such a fundamentally different experience that you have to wonder if this was the goal. Like if you were going to change the game radically, dramatically over and over again, then what kind of game were you even trying to make? Like, are you even playing it? Like, do you even like it as it is? Like, what's going on here? And so I definitely think that like less significant changes, but more hot fixes and optimizations, we can call them, would definitely be a better spot for Valve to be in.
So how do we feel then as the general idea to maybe increase the amount of updates that we get, right? We've just touched on, and it's kind of been corroborated, I guess, by, I think it was Harry that mentioned, to be fair, my memory serving me very well there, hopefully, who said that, Source was they were able to make changes kind of while they were there. And they said, oh, well, maybe we'd like this, maybe we'd like, a bit more movement. It was along the lines of something like that. And they just changed one of the values, and the game felt better for it. So is that something that maybe you guys would be interested in, is having these frequent updates? I feel like there is maybe a possibility that they fall into where, because to be fair, I don't know where Dota's at, but the Riot game development ethos is to kind of keep these updates coming. League's updated once every 2 weeks. I think Valorant is updated pretty regularly as well, and has
it's change for the sake of change as opposed to change to ascribe to a vision.
Yeah, right. Sure.
You have to make sure that you're actually building towards whatever you think you're not at yet. And if you're at it already, rather, then that's enough. Like I said, I was referencing Brood War. Like, I'm on the other side of the fence from the let's update every 2 weeks kind of crowd, right? I think that's actually what killed StarCraft 2 first and foremost. So I feel like that's my version of it. But yeah, absolutely. If people think that it's going to lead to a better game, then I'd be interested in them sort of showing the work, as it were. Like, why do you think that, right? So yeah, I don't know how it's going to work out exactly, but I'm not even sure if Valve is going to do that, right? Like, we have to wait and see.
Yeah. I think there is just a huge problem with, I mean, personally, that I have with how Riot tries to approach it, because it is like they are trying to create their own meta, which I don't like. I don't like when a developer is trying to create their own idea of the game and then they force it onto the player and they force them to play that specific style again and again and again. I'm not too well versed with Valorant and League all too much, but I do know that the primary idea is that there'll be these broad sweeping changes, and what will happen is all of these metas will all coincide into one style of play, and all of the teams will have to play the same style, and you'll have to wait until the next patch, because maybe you might become a better team in the next patch, but not in this one, and it happens again and again and again, and it is so boring because you never get settled on an actual strong team. You can never actually quantify how good a specific team is good at the game. And what CS is so good at is allowing for the game to gestate and take shape and understand maybe this is the style of play that we could go towards. And then suddenly there's a new way to play the game. There's a new smoke or a new flash or a new nade, and something just radically changes. And they give you so much time to adapt and understand that once these big sweeping changes come in, for us, it'll probably be either a little bit of weapon damage changes or like a weapon price change, or maybe a map change. Like those are kind of the main things that I could see change. I mean, they're not going to touch the game itself. And if we can have that same amount of time being given, I think we'll be in a good space. I think I'd much prefer that, where the community themselves, casually and professionally, all come together to kind of figure out and coin what the meta is moving forward. Because in that way, it just makes the community that much more healthier, and it provides a bit more back and forth between person playing the game and person creating the game. And I don't want it to become person creating the game telling the person playing the game what to do. I hate that.
Yeah.
Right. It's like we're playing it for our enjoyment and to understand the game ourselves. Let us have fun with it and explore the sandbox as we please. And I think that should be the priority here, and they should maintain that. I'm not looking, I mean, sure, you can add in a skin collection here and there regularly to incentivize the casual audience. Maybe you can add some sort of a battle pass or something. Very small, minute changes that could drastically change the number of players that will constantly be visiting and revisiting the game. But I don't think you have to touch the gameplay aspects of it whatsoever until, maybe at the end of a major cycle or during a player break. That I think is well more than enough. Like I think that we don't have to go beyond that, really.
Yeah, I think what we see is that you can finish a multiplayer game as a developer. People have forgotten that, but you can actually finish it. Like, you can say it's done, and then, or at the very least, finish it for now. Revisit it later if something crops up that's a problem. And Brood War is balanced through maps. I think FPS games can be the same way. You can almost argue that actually Counter-Strike has been balanced through maps for a little bit now, even though there have been other changes, like most recently the A1S and op nerfs and whatnot. But broadly speaking, you can balance the game in many different ways And it doesn't actually have to be through changing the game itself. Like if there's a problem in the competitive space and it's mostly centered around interactions that are like very specific to maps, you can change the maps, you can replace the maps with something else. There's so many things you can do in that sort of facet. And I just feel like it's a healthier way, as you're saying, Paladin, to engage the community. Now you're not like legislating how the game is played. I mean, people who aren't familiar with League of Legends might not know there was like this whole case where some guy was playing an off-meta pick as in a position where it's not usually played, and as a result, he was like punished for it. Like, actually, I don't think he was banned, but he might have been like game restricted or something. It's like that's like a crazy outlier example, but it's the same mentality. It's like, okay, we can't even decide where we're gonna take our champions. Like, it would be as if, oh, you can't play the MP9 in apartments arbitrarily. Right, we're just gonna decide that that's bannable or something. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so ridiculous. So no, it's the beauty of the games come from when people say, here's the tools at my disposal, here's the sandbox I have. Now how can I innovate? How can I do something different? How can I catch my opponent off guard? Or how can I just play to my own personal strengths and express my personality through the game itself? This is something that is like a lost art to most developers, and thankfully Counter-Strike has been exempt from it for so long. And we just really, I think it's unlikely that like this is something that also bears mentioning, especially considering the rest of the game space, like the industry at large. The idea that Valve decided to once again say, yes, mappers will have access to the tools that we had access to in Source 2. We're not going to restrict that. We're going to keep it. Like, it's a smart business decision, but most people don't make that. Valorant still doesn't even have fucking replays, guys, like, let alone a map editor. So the idea that yeah, like they absolutely don't want it. And I don't understand why. Like, not only does it cements your game's ability to have longevity outside of you yourself interacting with the content, it obviously lets community create maybe more casual things instead of just the competitive stuff, but also might actually innovate and replace some of the maps that you yourself made when you thought you knew what the apex of the game looked like, right? And it's just so wild that that's not the case in most games. And thankfully, Valve have continued to sort of stand alone and say, yes, we're actually supporting this, right? One of the only premier competitive games that actually is going to allow user-made content to eventually, potentially, as we saw with Anubis, replace first-party content from Valve themselves. Like, most developers are too proud to admit that or something, I guess. But like, yeah, somebody will actually dedicate a ton of hours figuring out what might be a really cool, innovative layout that still allows you to play the game to a degree that is actually enjoyable to watch and enjoyable to play and rewarding and all this other stuff. And we just don't get that opportunity in a lot of other games. So thank Gaben. I was about to say thank God, but obviously we know who to thank instead. Thank Gaben for supporting mappers and modders and etc. So hopefully we'll get some really exciting stuff down the pipe. I mean, that's another thing too, is that Gabe follower on Twitter was talking about how everybody was really hyped for what might have been, and we didn't know this, but apparently actually all that hype was worth it. They are changing a big part of the game. However, on top of that, one of the best things, and we said it earlier on this show, listen, you can actually make better changes faster with the fact that it's now on Source 2. That's an engine upgrade. That's a productivity upgrade for everybody involved. So that's going to be huge, not just now, but like in 6 months or a year or whatever, when people have really started to see the fruits of that labor.
Yeah. Spaghetti code is now gone, right? And that is the biggest thing, because that's the thing that they would cite the most often as to why they took updates to take so long. And I think if we can just have that dramatically change, it's just going to be so effortless. And I think the number one thing for me is just like hot fixing. It's like, if there is a major tournament, and we don't have to have the Olaf boost debacle anymore.
Yes.
Like, there could just be a quick hot fix immediately after, and they could replay the match. Like, it's actually possible. And that alone makes me feel like when we do make that eventual transition, it's not going to be as ugly as it was from 1.6 to go. It could be much more of a cleaner transition where these bugs can fall away, and a lot of these teams can feel safe to move over, knowing what's in the pipeline and how hands-on that they are, and they know that they can turn around things very quickly.
Yeah, I think as well, keeping the fact that they'll be able to push out balance updates a little bit easier. I think it gives us the best of both worlds in a way. I would also agree that I don't really want the game to go into, being changed kind of frequently, and having a meta design for us, as it were. But at the same time, I don't want something like the Krieg to come back in the way that it was, and all it would have taken, well, not all it would have taken, but it would have made a vast difference on the way the meta was formed and how powerful this gun was if they just kind of went in, maybe a month later or whatever, after a big tournament, right, had just occurred, and gone, well, maybe we went a little bit too far. Let's just knock it down by, the damage is to decrease. Let's see what that does, right? And that felt like something that they did with the A1S, because I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, like, correct me if I am wrong here, but they changed the ammo on the A1S first without changing the damage or anything like that. They reduced the ammo on it, and that
Yes.
wasn't
I think
enough.
so, yeah.
That wasn't enough, right? There was still a change that had to happen, and it had to be, you know, a flat change to the gun, right? There's a world in which it doesn't quite function the same, but there's a world in which maybe the AWP going down to 5 is a bit too few. So maybe we kind of move up to 7. Now, I actually feel like, you know, the AWP change is pretty good and sits, but you know what I mean? Or maybe where the Deagle was at, it's like, right, let's, you know, bring it so that 2 shots isn't going to kill someone in the body, but it still does a lot of damage. Or maybe they feel like it still does too much damage and they can just knock another sort of 4 or 5 damage points off the weapon itself. And I think that it will open us up to just having, you know, a nice, healthy balance between the competitive scene and the casual scene, because at the end of the day, you know, there are certain things that really do affect the competitive scene. I saw the Krieg while I was playing MM, but most people at my kind of level, you know, weren't really all that bothered. They'd still stick to the AK. It's what they know. It feels natural. They don't want to learn a new gun. But at the competitive level, obviously everybody moved off onto the Krieg there. The sort of second round 4 spies where you drop 2 Kriegs and it's like, the power of this gun essentially means you've got like 3 weapons, and then you have a couple of utility mules. You just got to execute into a bomb site, and you've got a strong enough gun to take out the people on the site. And now you're in a post plant that's 5v3. Go have fun with that CT side, right? So I think that things like that, it will allow, Source 2 will allow these smaller, more you know, zoomed in kind of changes, and I think that that is really going to be cool for the game. I do like where we're at, though, at the same time saying that. I do like where the meta kind of sits, where if we can have maybe 6 to 8 months of a meta in terms of weaponry, in terms of what's strong, I think that that's kind of cool. But yeah, I think they maybe do need to hit a bit of a, saying that, I think they need to hit so an update cycle that makes a little bit more sense in terms of its frequency, because we did also, if you bear in mind, we had M4 was a bit of an issue. Let's work on that, and they did, and it's like, all right, cool. And then also we've got this AWP change in there, and everyone was kind of like, well, I mean, is that needed necessarily? I guess.
Yeah,
what
is the? It's a non sequitur. It's like, how
yeah,
do you get
yeah.
from one to the, yeah.
So it felt a bit weird to have the AWP change in there as well. So I think, yeah, maybe working on bringing in something that has a little bit more of a pattern to it might make it easier to have this balance between like a design meta and a meta that is able to flourish for itself. Because I think another thing in CS is like the meta of nades is never really going to be changeable. And we see, you know, the meta of map changes, things like that are so big. And then you have sort of the more general meta of where the guns are at. It tends to be more important on the gun side of things. And if a map gets changed like Ancient did recently, it's like, okay, you know, cool to have that change.
Contained.
Players
it's just
will,
on that map.
yeah, exactly. And players will work with that. But if a gun gets changed, that affects the whole ripple of like the entire game, and is much bigger. So again, it comes back to this conversation of us being like, well, do we want guns changed frequently? Do we want maps changed frequently? It looks like maps are kind of here to stay. Some of them especially are just not going to really get changed. So yeah, I think a very open-ended kind of game we now get that Source 2 is allowing all this editing to come in.
There's one thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is we talk about changes. Now, obviously, the smoke rework is a big change. We haven't talked about additions. What are they going to add to the game? What are they going to plus? Because one of the big things, Paladin said it earlier, spaghetti code obviously holding back CSGO. They couldn't add new weapons for the menu, guys. Like the menu had a limited number of slots, and trying to change it internally was apparently causing them a lot of grief. We could now see realistically, like, maybe CS2 has 20 more guns. We have no idea. Like, that's an extreme expectation. We haven't seen any sign of it just yet. But like the idea of them adding more stuff or even more utility types, like, it's possible. Like they can do it now without, you know, competing with this ridiculous spaghetti code base for the buy menu. So I don't know, man. That's already kind of like an interesting, and I would say I would be like equal parts like a little bit excited to see where it goes, but also very much dreading like what is going
Mhm.
on. What are they going to do? Like they had a couple of unsuccessful experiments, we'll call them, between the revolver at launch, and since then it's just been a useless gun. Their balance edits to the AUG and Krieg obviously led us to one of the worst gun metas, like the actual gun round metas for a while. And then on top of that, they had the Negev rework, which nobody's really using, especially at the professional level, and then obviously the MP5 SD, is that the one,
Yeah,
the silence one?
Yep.
So nobody's really using that either, unless they're memeing.
Yeah, there's a couple
And
merchants out there, Shout
there you
out my
go.
guy Jocko one time.
There you go.
Ridiculous.
Some random guy named Jocko. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of places where I think maybe they might decide to sink their teeth into themselves and say, we can try to make all of the guns that we currently have viable, but where's the fun in that? Let's just add new guns, guys. So I don't know. It really depends on what they come down on.
I just want them to make one bad mistake now and realize that it was a bad mistake and
Oh,
slow
I
things
see.
down later. Because I don't want huge shakeups
Yeah, of
personally,
course.
just because I feel like the game that we have right now is perfect. Like
Yeah, sure.
like as
what you
far as
could
like
see.
the baseline of it, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I feel like what you could see is actually them doing something wacky, like adding a new weapon or whatever new piece of utility, but then having it not be available and competitive for a certain amount of minimum time,
That
so
could
that the
work,
casual
yeah.
play can test it out or something and decide if it's good. But the problem is, I mean, for one, there's all of the expense that goes into the graphic audiovisual design of something new that they probably don't want to just shelve and throw away necessarily if it doesn't work. So I feel like if they add it at all for testing, it's going to be in the game and we just have to deal with it. But like there's already been gentlemen's agreements before. I think it's broken now, but apparently you weren't allowed to buy a Negev by popular vote or something
Yeah,
in
yeah.
professional play for a little bit now, so for a couple of years maybe. So yeah, not sure what that's all about, but I'm sure that would just happen again if it was something was really ridiculous. Although maybe not. Maybe everybody would just be like, I ain't doing it. Because I do remember there was that competitive agreement or gentleman's agreement to not use the agent skins. And then when the RMRs rolled around and they were like obviously allowed, the tournaments had no way to overrule Valve for that. A bunch of the Russian teams were just like, all right, let's time to make it as confusing as possible. We're all the same agent. Good luck figuring out who's who. How many people are in one spot or whatever. Yeah. So there's a lot of cases where that can happen. So you never know. Maybe they can remove agent skins. What do you guys think? Can they add CL min models now?
No. So they've actually said on that, it's obviously not something as a podcast that we'd be super interested in. But they're keeping skins all sorted.
Your whole inventory, right?
Yeah, on the little playthrough of a few AK skins, a few FAMAS skins, whatever it is. There's also agent skins on there, so I think they are going to keep them, and I think that'll be an area that they'll take great pride in having upgraded or whatever, as well as the all the agents look more serviceable. So because there's a couple of them at the moment that look aged for sure. Considering
I can't wait for the scuba gear agents to have the blinding glare reflection on their scuba gear.
Yo,
actually acts as
true.
a secondary flashbang while I'm trying to shoot them in the head, which can't really be seen as a head because there's this fucking scuba thing. Yeah, all right, great. Thanks, Valve.
It's one of the things actually. Apparently, flashes are kind of OP at the moment, so.
Oh yeah,
right.
We'll see,
yeah, like they
we'll
last
see what
a little bit too long. Correct.
Yeah. I think so. And well, it also seemed like they talked about just not really seeing a flash coming and suddenly being blinded by it for quite a while. So they were quite strong in source apparently. So there's history there. So hopefully they get on top of things like that.
I guess my question as like a history fanatic for the game, I guess it's a loose term, but do we think that this is going to be as big of a change of 1.6 to Go as Go will be to CS:GO 2?
It's a good question.
I feel like it has to be, right? Because the biggest change from 1.6 to Go arguably was the Molotovs, right? There's a lot of other changes, but like the addition of new equipment. And now at minimum, we have an entirely reworked set of utility, which interacts with all of the other utility and weapons in the game. So that also feels like it would have the equal sort of ripple effect, but I don't know what you guys think.
I'm thinking it'll be a bit more seamless. I think the Source 1 engine. I mean, Source 2 looks like it's going to change up kind of how models move across the plane. as it were. I'm not so up on my game design lingo.
Well, they had different animations even for throwing stuff. We saw some of like the third person like over the shoulder or whatever, or a few shots of them like looking dead on, and the animations are a little bit more involved. Maybe a little bit awkward looking, but it's also new, so you never know really if it's just bias of like, hey, this thing is stupid, but it's just because it's new, so it's unfamiliar. Yeah. CS players should definitely be familiar with that experience, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. But yeah, I mean, that could be it, right?
I don't think there'll be as much of a shift. I don't think there'll be as much of a crazy kind of change. It feels like the gunplay is going to function very similar. The maps are going to function very similar. They've had revamps and retouches and things like that, but it seems like the overall engine is easier to work with, but the sort of change might not be as big. But we'll see. We'll see. Apparently, there's a lot of changes with audio and how kills kind of come through. When you get a kill, it makes a noise, a bit similar to Valorant. Well, that is from Valorant, to be honest.
I didn't know that detail. One of the things I did see is that you have like trading cards in the bottom that show up as you get kills, which I hope is not kill streaks or some shit, but that's the only thing. As soon as I saw that, I was like, what the fuck? I'm going to play my I got 4 shots, so I'm going to get my full house, royal flush out. See ya, dude. And it's like, what the hell? Like, why is that happening? So it really is Artifact 2, but CS.
Yeah, the thing is as well, though, that I have a feeling that little sort of play test, demo test or whatever, that UI might get toned down for competitive, or,
I hope so, yeah.
Like, it's within, not just at the top level of the game, but I mean like when you go into the competitive game mode, right? Because I have a feeling it looks a little bit like it's deathmatch at the moment, so I maybe am thinking that those types of things come up during deathmatch, so it's like you've got a streak, it feels a bit cooler, because obviously when you get a kill in Valve deathmatch, I think it does make a ding. It does make like a weird little ding noise in the Valve.
I think that's only community. Actually, yeah, there's like 2 different types of dings. There's like one in community and one in Valve-based ones.
Right.
But yeah,
like the one in the Valve-based one is just a Half-Life sound they recycle for about 20 years. So but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So yeah, I don't know, but to answer the question, I think that the change is going to be much smoother, I think, and it was kind of a seismic shift from 1.6 into Go because of how good the game looked as well, right? Like we're on this middle way that Valve want to go with, obviously, is that Source famously runs on anything. They kind of want to make Source 2 the same, but it also has to look a bit better. And again, how do you do that? They're in this great position where you do that by adding a bit more color, a bit more light, and that seems to give the illusion of like a graphical update.
Yeah, I mean, shadows are the most expensive thing to draw in GPU script, so the fact that they removed all shadows from the entire fucking game definitely makes it easier to run.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, go ahead.
The one thing that I usually tie to like a potential game-defining difference is movement, and I think that on the ESL stream they were talking about how the movement did feel a little different, just between they've changed like the tick system, right? So now it's sub-tick, and apparently the reaction timing of you actually typing or like moving on your keyboard is pretty different in comparison to like jiggling on Source 1. And so I'm very curious to see how that changes like the moment-to-moment gameplay of like pro play, where maybe jiggling might be irrelevant now, and it might be more like Valorant, where when you swing and you do get hit with one bullet, you completely stop in place and you're kind of screwed, and it requires more one taps rather than full sprays and stuff like that. I think that is what is really worrying to me. I think that we'll see when it actually comes out whether it is that seismic. But if it is, I feel as though we could be headed for a completely different game, just because I think philosophically it just changes how we approach the basic like fundamentals of how we would like default around or something like that. You wouldn't have just like a player run out long doors on Dust 2 and just jiggle it. You would have to like go and commit to the fight or something like that. That's a really stupid example, but like what I mean.
Even just jump peeking on like Mirage B apartments,
that might be like
a SWAT van,
and that was like one of the number one things that we would use in CS to get information as a CT. Like you would always jump peek in any possible angle because it's such a difficult shot to hit if you're a T. And if that's irrelevant now, well, then you could be in for a whole world of trouble, I think, and you have to just redefine how you play CT sides altogether. You'd have to play much more passive, try to play more crossfires at that point, and I think that could again change the game. So it feels like a very Wheel C type of situation, but for now, I do like the possibility that we could be heading for some new history.
Yeah. New history in the making. And you know what? it's not the only 2 that happened today. Okay, CS2 announced, and also Outsiders 2 announced. It's called Virtus Pro. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yep.
But thirdly, there's of course G2 who are out of EPL.
Yes,
They're going to go play CS2 early. That's the
yeah,
same.
well, I mean, I would hope they get invited to the playtest. Would be nice, but
Apparently nobody has. Actually, that's a point that I would like to linger on. Is like you guys were talking earlier, Scripps specifically. You were talking about how they want to make the hype train, keep it rolling. Like announce this early, and then it's summer 2023, and so that's happening, and yada yada yada. But they haven't apparently actually invited any streamers to the new beta, right? Is that that's what I'm hearing, is
I
that
think so.
people generally, like pro players and streamers, don't seem to actually have access yet, and the access was instead given to like people like randoms on matchmaking and stuff. So actually I haven't played matchmaking in a long time, so I'm definitely not in it, but that's apparently one of the things they said. It was like it was a complicated process, and they gave it based on your time spent on Valve servers, I think is the wording. So matchmaking and like the official games and stuff instead of community servers, which is a bit weird, but like okay. And then apparently also, Paladin, you were saying earlier before we went live that I guess this is only Dust 2 anyway. It's super limited in terms of what it's testing, and so yeah, obviously in that case, like I said earlier, count me out. I don't want to play more Dust 2 fucking map. But yeah, I do think that it's kind of weird that they would announce, like they make this big old hype explosion, and then they sort of give access to whoever. And I don't even know if they're allowing people to stream it. I actually don't know any of the details. So.
They are.
They are.
So,
okay.
so the one specific thing that they actually put out a tweet recently, which like gave their quotas for what you would have to reach in order to get picked, and it was
okay.
It was like, here. Recent playtime on Valve official servers, trust factor, and Steam account standing.
Yeah.
So it might actually like be a negative for people that play Faceit and ESA regularly. And I've been playing a lot of matchmaking, so I'm hoping that counts for something.
Yeah,
but,
same.
But that could actually be a huge hit to the pro scene, because why the hell would they be playing matchmaking in any sense of the word? Or even Valve deathmatch servers, they'll be on community servers 9 times out of 10. So it might actually completely neuter everything.
Yeah, I just thought of what Yumi was saying in the chat. Shout out Yumi. He said you'd think they'd announce it and give people access, but people haven't put pics of the menus and anything else. Like there's not really been any leaks about, like, or not even leaks at this point. If they're allowed to stream it, like you'd think they're allowed to show it off. All I was thinking is it's based on like your playtime on Valve servers. Yeah, if you haven't played a game in 12 years, you got access, so that we can say we gave access. So, but nobody's actually going to play because their Steam accounts are dead or something. It's obviously not the case, but that's just one of the things that I thought. I was like, yeah, why haven't I actually seen any menus or UI or anything? I've been looking around here and there, and maybe it might just be escaping me, but it seems awfully strange we're not actually getting any more info. But you know what? This is the bleeding edge. It just went live a few hours before we started the show.
Yeah,
so
who knows?
I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
It said later tonight is what they said on Pro League. So
there you go. They're
probably
waiting
later
for Pro League
tonight.
to be over. Yeah.
NA time. Yeah, well, they really turned the show upside down. They didn't want to go to break. They just wanted to talk about CS2.
Of course.
By releasing it in the middle of the and I remember they called Simple over, and Simple was like, "It's a bait. You're lying to me. Why? Why is this gaslighting? Why is the entire talent group just saying, come over here and see?" And he just sat there and he just went, "What the fuck?" Like, it was a very, very wholesome, candid moment.
Yeah. He was surprised.
The announcement of Counter-Strike 2. So
I will say, whoever did the voiceover for those videos adds an air of legitimacy to it. It's like
100%. Yeah.
In Counter-Strike 2, we have new smokes. Oh shit, let's go! All right, I'm on board. Yeah, just from that alone. So nice stuff. I will say also, I guess the last sort of point on CS2 or whatever, Paladin had a show with Thorin recently on an episode of Rescope, and you guys were actually talking about like, who does this benefit or whatever. One of the interesting things I thought from what you said was that like actually players on like players on G2, like Munacy, for example, who are grinders who constantly play the game, have gotten themselves to a certain level of like baseline knowledge, which now may actually just be totally outdated. I don't know if you wanted to like echo some points now that we know a little bit more details about that, but like it does feel like Munacy in particular, who knows every smoke trick in the book, every movement trick in the book, if there's any changes to movement, and there are obviously changes to smokes, there's going to be people like him who are maybe going to feel a little bit spurned. I mean, I know there's still a major to go for, so it's not like it's useless, but it will soon be less useful than it was, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the youngsters, especially, I mean, your Shiros, your Axiles, your Monacies, all of these players that are seemingly just nearing the cusp of like the elite status of a CSGO player. having that ripped away from you is so difficult, because now you are at square one with every other player that is wants to be an aspiring pro, or is a current pro in CS:GO that wants to be an aspiring pro in CS:GO 2. Like that, or sorry, Counter-Strike 2. That's gonna be hard to get
That'll be a
around.
little
But,
bit, yeah.
but yeah, I think that is just really hard for some of these youngsters who have already made a name for themselves, and it's hard to kind of rise up the ranks in Go, and to have that just ripped away from you is really ugly. I think the other super awful thing is for players like Zywoo and Nico, who are really trying to, or even Device, honestly, who are trying to go toe-to-toe with Simple's history. Now that is basically null and void. Simple is going to be the GOAT. Like, just that is etched in history now. There is no way that you can change that kind of narrative whatsoever, even though there was a possibility that Nico could win this major and maybe the next major in 2023. And now that's all gone as well. So even for some of the veterans who have been trying so hard to catch up with Simple, the race is over. There is an end in sight now. And
that's a
I
huge
think
point. You know what? Nico might actually exit CS:GO without a major. Like,
it's actually
could
possible.
happen, right? So
And they look mortal. So
yeah.
Just
but
like,
yeah,
oh yeah, go on.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna throw in a just like he exited Pro League without a win in.
No, actually, that was the segue I was gonna take. So we could honestly just start talking about that, because boy, oh boy, was that ugly.
Back in a boring land of Counter-Strike Global Offensive,
We're doing
and
the
not Counter-Strike 2. Come
been
back in. All right,
derailed.
boys. Take down the green screen. The production's over. No, obviously Ence have defeated G2, G02. And big ups to Snappy. Obviously, fan of him on this show since he's been here once and he's agreed to come back on again. Spoiler, maybe soon. You never know, right? Especially now that he's about to win Pro League. Oh, I don't actually know if that's true. But FaZe look pretty good right now. But this could actually mean that might actually just be the Grand Slam cemented, right? Snappy might have done it for him. You know what I mean? So that's a big deal too. But yeah, with G2 out, I mean, narrowly losing the opening map, their own map pick. By the way, did we have to get like the worst two maps to open up the series? Like, at least it was over in 2. But come on, Ancient into Vertigo.
Ancient,
what are your guys' takes?
Ancient's a bit of a mess, but I think it feels more exciting with the changes. I do think Ancient is kind of exciting.
It's more like one and done, though, right? There's not really any flow, because as soon as you lose the initial CT positions, you have to get owned or retake, and usually it's save meta. So, but I guess if you win as CT, it can be more interesting. Like if you win the opening fight, it's a 4v5, and then the T's have to kind of fun around. But there's not nearly as much back and forth, right? So maybe Ancient is a map that they can rework in Counter-Strike too. You never know.
They could. I think that Ancient isn't as bad as Vertigo, personally.
Yes,
I think that the mid rounds, at least in Ancient, feel like plausible. Like if you are on a team, you have options. But on Vertigo, it feels like everything just collapses, because I don't know, man. The rotations just feel so ugly, and both for CTs and Ts. So I don't know. I don't really like it whatsoever. And of course, the meta is super stale with the smokes on bottom A ramp and bottom stairs or top stairs as well. So yeah, it wasn't pretty to see G2 go down this way on these maps, but I think more so, it just felt as though m0NESY kind of disappeared throughout the series, where I would always feel like he was good for certain plays and certain ideas, but none of them were working, and it felt like he just had an off series, and Ence capitalized. Like, credit to players like Nertz and Dha, who are like really on top of things, especially capitalizing on some of these weak holes on Ancient especially. I'd really like their T side. Just very confidence heavy. They didn't necessarily pull any punches. And I think that's the one thing I have to really give credits to Snappy for. They've always really been proud of having a super aggressive T side, and they've stuck to that identity, and it's worked against G2 here. And I hope that it can continue to have some success later on in the tournament, because it's a unique style. People aren't too brazen to follow in his footsteps, but clearly it has some effect on especially these two maps.
Yeah, really impressive to see Nertz as well, right? This is obviously his kind of first outing. I think we were just robbed in terms of timing at the CCT event. He didn't make it there, and actually Ence didn't perform too well at that one. So things weren't looking great for Ence rolling into Pro League, but they've obviously turned things around and look really solid. At least against G2. They've got Vitality next, so certainly worry for that follow-up matchup. But yeah, Nertz is a player for a long time that, a lot of eyeballs have been on. When he was playing under Endpoint, he was kind of the standout thing on that team, and there was conversations, there was rumblings, there was rumors around when Ence brought in Valde and Sun Pius, but particularly Valde, that Nertz was actually, a part of that list that they were working with, and maybe the one that they should have gone to. But I think what sweetened the deal was maybe that Valde was not as expensive to take a chance on, and in the end they run out of options with Valde, as it were, and it's not really taking a chance now. It's kind of bailing them out, and it's sad to see in a sense, because Nertz should have been on this team a lot sooner, I think, if you ask me. And yeah, a really impressive player, just continuing on that aggressive sort of lurk play that he pulls out. It might be more clean as the 1-for-1 that they were looking for. That's what they did with Spinks and Valde, and it looks like Nertz is much more comfortable in that role, and that makes sense because it's exactly what he did for Endpoint as well. And again, found a lot of success there, was really dominating the tier 2 scene for a good while. So yeah, very, very happy to see Ence. And we're obviously, again, I'm similar to you, man. I've had Madden on for an interview, so we're a little biased when it comes to the Ence boys, because they're a good bunch. But yeah, Nertz really delivering and looking good in his first outing for this squad.
Stylistically, when they brought in Valde, it was going to be a change, like a massive change, because of how much more passive he plays. And clearly it didn't work out, and now they've figured out that maybe Nertz is that option to basically replace Spinks in kind of his style as well.
Yes.
And that has clearly changed how Ence like to play these maps. And I mean, he's getting the stats as well, so I think it's good for both parties involved.
Might be a honeymoon period, we never know, but I will have to say, with Dupree now back in Vitality, that does not actually look like a super strong team. I mean, I know Vitality, like Dupree's a good player and all that, but Jax was like popping off in the group stage for this event. If Dupree's back in the lineup for this semifinal or a quarterfinal matchup, Ence could pretty easily book it to the semifinals if they keep playing like this. You know what I mean? So looking to the future, immediate future, definitely looks super promising. And, Vitality aren't going to be an easy opponent, but I almost feel like they're a little bit easier now that they're going like in the middle of an event, going back to the old lineup instead of sort of seeing the event through. It's an impossible situation, like, I wouldn't say politically, but like public relations wise or whatever. You don't want to be like, nah, Dupree, you can continue to sit this one out because Jax is performing great, even though you're ready to come back. Like, you don't want to do that for a big event that could count towards a grand slam of your own if you decided to take it. So, I don't know. It's just like, it's one of those situations where they probably feel a little bit impossible, but I don't think that they have good chances of taking the whole event, especially. But maybe not even the matchup against Ence. I definitely wasn't gonna. I was gonna assume G2 beat Ence and then beat Vitality as well. Shocking upset, obviously, but Ence looking pretty good. I think they can go further.
It's impressive. It is impressive. I think that Ence a really solid team, and they definitely have the room to bring a little bit more. I just. I'm not sure. The ceiling's got to be there for this team at this point, right? I think honeymoon period is a really good point to raise. And I do feel that the Ents are, always on the extremities. Is now the time. I mean, taking down G2 is probably as far as we see this team go, to be honest. I don't know that they can continue to topple giants in the early stage, but I'm totally happy to be wrong on that.
Yeah, my issue is their map pool still feels a little bit unknown, so to speak. They don't really have anything comfortable just yet. And I think you could definitely say, oh, well, they're comfortable on all maps, but I don't really buy that logic. I mean, there's obviously going to be comfort on specific maps that they want to gravitate towards. I don't really feel like there is that sort of map that they have right now. And I think it'll take some time, but once we kind of gather what they're actually good on reliably, I think we could probably understand a little bit more as to where Ence actually lies in the rankings for right now. But it'd be great to have them come back into the conversation because we need more stable teams. And right now, we have nothing remotely close to stability across any of these teams. And I thought G2 was definitely going to be one of those teams, but I suppose not, because now it seems like it's only Heroic and maybe even FaZe if you want to count it to some extent. But other than that, the field is just wide open.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If Ence can stick it to him, so to speak, at least be like, that might not be able to go to top 3 in the world or whatever, but at least hang around that top 5 area and challenge for maybe a trophy that some of the other top 3 teams aren't going towards, right? Like maybe you can steal a sneaky event somewhere down the line. Maybe Dallas, if FaZe win here and actually get the Grand Slam, then maybe they take a Rio or Dallas. I don't even know if they're going to Rio. I didn't bother looking it up, but some of these events that are a little bit easier to like a smaller field, more condensed field, you only need to win so many games. Pro League obviously is a very long format. So it's a little bit harder to maybe sneak this one in, which is why this event will probably look very legit in retrospect in the rear view. But like you said, Paladin, we're gonna have to wait and see. One of the things that I thought was kind of funny is related to the fact that like when you actually look at how you're talking about the map pool of Ence and stuff. Did you guys catch this whack interview after Pro League when Liquid won a game to qualify to playoffs? And they were like, yeah, by the way, we were just trolling about the 7
Oh,
map
I did see
pool."
this. Yeah.
Like, what? I saw that. I was like, what are you guys talking about? You're just trolling. So it's like mind games for interviews. You say this right before you go into a series, right? Like, and then they get dumpstered by Pain. Like, what's going on, guys? What's going on? You can't just be like, here's all our secrets, by the way. And then, I don't know if it even played a factor in that series.
I guess we could talk about Liquid in general, just because I think that they've been abysmal to watch, to say the least.
Think about your point about stability. Like Liquid was probably supposed to be another stable team, and here they are losing to Pain 2-0 in a Pro League playoffs. You know what I mean?
They had their start again. They lost against Rare Atom, and I was like, look, it's just gonna be a wash. Let it die. But they powered themselves up. They had a really impressive series against Astralis. I mean, granted, it's against Astralis, but still, it showed that they were capable of being a dominant team. Again, relatively. And as soon as they play against Pain, they've got a great veto as well. I mean, just to have a Mirage start, I don't think Pain is necessarily well versed on the map from what I've watched in like ECL level type of competition. And so I thought this would be very simple. And I think I got enough information off of Mirage alone where they would try to make these overzealous plays. They would try to make these ego peaks, and the communication would just be all over the place. And as soon as somebody dies, there would be no follow-up. I mean, on both sides of the equation. On the T side, you would have just these contact plays through connector with absolutely no information as to what's going on the A site, and and then they'd like follow up onto a B play, which very unorthodox plays that don't make any sense in context of Liquid's regular playbook. And then you go over to the CT side, you're like, okay, well, they've got 6 rounds, maybe they can manage to get through. It got even worse, where they have all these mid crossfires set up, and they don't even know which player is watching what angle. And as soon as one player dies, all the rest of them do too. Like, it's just stuff that I wouldn't expect a team like Liquid to ever cause. Like, fundamental issues like that, I would never put them to be the type of team to have those kinds of issues. And this is just very worrying heading into the Americas RMR, because there are a lot of very strong BR teams that could catch them off guard if things go awry. And I don't even know at this point if they could retain their legend spot, because that could be also a huge issue because of how in flux all of these teams are. They've got to go flawless.
Yeah. I remember tuning in to Ancient, and it was sort of already gone. I didn't catch the start of it. I think I was watching the other game, to be fair. And Nitro was just like 0-11. I was like, what is going on here, man? Like, it just feels like this team is falling apart, to be honest with you. I really did back them towards the end of last year. I really backed them. They had Yekindar. It's a great addition, a great pickup. Really give them a bit more life. OC looked like he was, finding some form and looking a lot stronger towards the tail end of last year. But it just seems like everything but the wheels has fallen off of this one, to be honest with you. And I don't really know how they find the recovery, to be frank. I think that maybe a leadership change has to come in, but it does feel like you say a lot of fundamental issues just seems all over the place. And I don't know, the whole vibe of this team just seems wildly off. Not that, I should maybe just talk about vibes, but you know what I mean.
No, it does matter with North American teams. I have 100% think that vibes is like half the battle. Like, if they're not feeling good, they will play like shit, like guaranteed.
Oh, think about Jackson Vitality even. I've been on the show several times now saying, Apex, bro, stop raging, please. Like, you might be told verbally by your teammates that it's not that big of a deal, and they understand it's just how you express yourself, but it affects people. Like, come on. If you look to your would-be captain, right? Well, he's actual captain, obviously, but he's supposed to be like the leader of men, and then you just see him going, oh, fucking it's like, what the come on, bro. Like, come on. Have some decorum,
Indeed.
So,
yeah.
I guess
you should
say to me more often, Scriv. You should say that.
Why, for you to have some decorum?
Have some decorum. Yeah,
I think it's the dynamic of the funny guy and the straight guy, and it's fresh for me, because usually in my friend groups I am the funny guy, so I get to try the other side of the comedic duo once in a while.
Listen, I'm not out to prop comedy yet. I haven't broken out all the shovels from my
yeah, well,
garage
indeed,
or whatever the
that
fuck
goes
Vu decides
exclusively to
do.
Vu. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
A nice reference for any long-time watchers. Which was the wildest thing in the world for him to just pull out spades and
Reasonable.
yeah, show his collection. In his house. I don't know why they're in the house. Surely they'd be like outside somewhere as well.
No.
It's kind
Just
of
from next door. We just opened a door.
Yeah, and they were there. I don't know. To kind of bring it on the Liquid point, we've said this an awful lot about Liquid. I think we maybe have been, apologizers for Liquid as a bit of a community. We want this team to do well. We know the ceiling that they're able to achieve, that these, at least the sort of core three, you can't really call Yukindar core at this point, right? Because he's not been in the team quite long enough. But as they would function as a team on the technical level, it would be their, core pack players, as it were. And you feel like Elige, Yukindar, and Naf, there's enough there to really make this team competitive. But getting taken down by an ECL level team is really surprising, and pretty handily so, right? I think everyone was saying that Mirage is just the biggest sort of upset maybe of the tournament, like within that map in and of itself, just how one-sided it was and how messy they looked. And it's usually a pretty good map for the likes of Liquid, and anything below 10 rounds is a pretty dominating affair. So really, really surprising to see that they go down so handily in this playoff stage. It wasn't even like it was a close, explosive game, unbelievable scenes coming in. It was just a pretty crafty defeat from Pain. They didn't have to work too hard to get it at all.
I don't know, man. I look at this Liquid roster and I'm just waiting for them to make a change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't know if they're gonna really make a change until after Paris, which is just so upsetting, because it feels like there's so many different results that this Liquid squad has had that has given them false confidence that this team is much better than it actually is. I mean, you look at the World Final result, you look at the previous EPL result. There are so many different caveats that you can tie to each and every one of these events as to like
even defeating FaZe at Katowice recently probably gave him a little bit of a false.
I'm sure it did.
grandiose,
Honestly, I think that result did a lot more damage than any other result, because FaZe were poised to go toe to toe with G2 at that event, right? And that was supposed to be the final that we were destined for. But I don't know. I think that at this point, surely if the RMR doesn't go according to plan, which I don't think it will, I think they will succeed here. And at least qualify. It would be absolutely appalling if they missed out. But I think that if they have a disappointing major result, which I'm expecting to happen, a change would happen. Like that, it's just inevitable at this point. But what decision would you make? Would you remove OC or would you remove Nitro, or would you remove both?
It's a good question, to be fair. I'd probably remove Nitro. I think I'd remove Nitro.
So?
I think that since he kind of came back from Valorant, his time might be up. I don't know. Nitro has never been heralded as a great IGL, right? Obviously not the role that he started in. So I just don't know that it's necessarily for him. And if it feels like there's so many of these fundamental level things that are going wrong, I think a lot of that might come down to the fact that, especially with Elige on your team, with Yukindar on your team, I don't know how much of an IGL Nitro actually is. When it comes down to mid-rounding and whatnot, we know that those two that I just mentioned are very, very vocal players. And I think that Nitro is, ultimately not all that. And he just can't put up the numbers at the moment as well, which is a really big thing at the minute. If you want to battle to be a top-level team, you either need to have like the biggest fraggers in the world around you, or you need to be able to do it yourself a little bit. And he is not only dead weight in a lot of these games, he's also, I think, not quite as verbal as people might think. I think that within this team, the IGL title is a little bit more for show, and when it comes down to like mid-rounding, when it comes down to the sort of late round and things like that, I just feel like he's not going to be as active there, looking at the type of players that they have on this team. And especially since adding Yukindar, it feels like they were really giving him a lot of the resources, a lot of the room to work with, and I think that affects actually how much of a role Nitro has. So I'd probably get rid of him, and I'd bring in someone a bit more hardline. We know that one of the problems that the NA teams have is that they sort of fill out their teams with yes men that just sort of work with the stars, and I feel like Nitro might be kind of like that sometimes, and not quite as vocal, not quite as hard hitting as he might need to be, especially at times like this when the team is really on a downward trend. You need an IGL that's going to come in and say, right, let's change this up. This whole idea, this whole philosophy that we had approaching the game is just not working anymore. So it's time to facilitate those big changes. And I just don't know that Nitro is the guy to do it, to be honest.
The Nitro example is really strange to me just because, like, just what he's done so far is really bizarre to me. I mean, Liquid has for a very long time, I would argue even during their Grand Slam run, it just happened to work out somehow. They really haven't understood how to use the AWP, guys. Like, as somebody who would study the game and take a look at what's going on, like, their op usage, they don't do nearly as much setup proactively to get OC the help that he might need. The same resources that you would see at a top level European CS, like the same conventions just don't seem to apply. And I mean, you talk about like Ykinder coming in, and obviously he was a big change of not just like the pacing that they might take on some attacks, but also just being able to reflect the system that, for example, Outsiders provides, somehow gave them a little bit of an edge in some matchups against CIS teams. They obviously always had a reason, like a paradoxically good matchup against Navi. And of course, that's extended over to Cloud9 now most recently. But if you actually look at the Spirit matchup, somehow that's like their kryptonite. They've obviously defeated them in Rio for the playoff qualification. And then just always, it seems to be like something that they have to work super hard to overcome if they manage to at all. The fact that they have systemically failed to consistently use an opper or use an op at all, regardless of who's actually picking it up, is so confusing to me. And I don't even know if like it was happening before Nitro came in when they had Fallen. Not that he's like the most mechanically gifted opper, but he's experienced enough. He knows where to go. He knows how to hit the shots. We've seen him play pretty well with Imperial, relatively speaking. So it's like he's not the weakest link necessarily on that team, even if he obviously has some low lows relative to what we expect from him. So yeah, I don't know. It's really bizarre to me, and I don't know if OC is just not catching the right level of support or what. And maybe he's getting into his own head because he's feeling the pressure of playing at tier 1. I think he was saying before in an interview that it's taking him longer than he thought it would to adjust to the uppermost echelon of CS. To me, that's because his team hasn't really been giving him the same setup that you would see for oppers at the uppermost echelon of CS, right? Like, he's not getting the resources of a device, for example. He's not getting the same setup. He's not being even put on the same page. He's told to frag. He's like expected to hit the shots, and sometimes he does miss some sitters, but he's not really like incorporated into the strat, it feels like. Not as cleanly and not as ubiquitously as a lot of the other teams seem to do. So I don't know if you could try to remove him and replace him with a European opera, but I feel like the results might not be that different at the end of the day.
I think when they first brought him on after Extra Salt, you had this expectation that he would stay as proactive as he was. He would be given a lot of tools to take risks and to kind of exert dominance onto the server as he did on Extra Salt, which is hard to do, to jump from tier 2 to tier 1. It always will be. But at the same time, you've got to let that situation breathe and let him try to work the server in his fashion and what he does most comfortably. But one thing Liquid has done is with youngsters is they've never done that. They want to pigeonhole their youngster into their system, and we saw it with Grim as well, where you can see the night and day difference with him on Triumph and Complexity, and compare him to what he was on Liquid. He's boxed into a role that he's not comfortable with, and he doesn't actually want to perform, that he can't perform in. And I think it's a very similar situation with OC, where systemically there is no way for him to perform without him just kind of breaking through the glass ceiling of what role he's confined in. And I think the only way that you can break that stigma is if you change personnel in terms of the in-game leading role. And I think you're exactly right, Scriv, with the fact that he is a bit of a dead weight in the fragging department, especially. I mean, he's got some pretty tough anchoring roles, and look, at this stage of the game, anchoring is very, very important, and we can see that it's wildly changing the levels of teams like Na'Vi with NPL, and it's very similar to Liquid as well, where I think that any site that he plays, it's like a rarity if he gets 2. I mean, it's an expectation that you should be getting 1, but even then, I'm not even seeing that happen that often. And as a person that is studying these supportive players a little bit more often than others, Nitro has never been ever in that conversation of an elite or even a sub-elite supportive element for any of these Liquid rosters. So I think that alone to me feels like he should be gone. But of course, then you tie in the in-game leading aspect. I don't even think that their playbook is that developed that you're losing too much. Like, there could be a very simple world where Legion Yekindar can co-call together on these T sides. They're not complicated. You can keep it as simple as you need it to be. and maybe you get a little bit of boost of firepower elsewhere, and you just change the dynamic of the game because you've got a very intelligent coach in Daps. I still think that you can keep him. I think he should stay around this organization, but I think if you just change who calls and speaks to Daps on a regular basis, I think things get a lot more easier for them.
The yes men angle is also super rough, right? Like, I don't know who you can really. You almost have to replace the people who are forcing yes men, like developing players into yes men to begin with, which, as far as I can tell, is probably Elige. You don't. Elige is practically liquid at this point. There was an opportunity before he got equity in the company, I think maybe a year and a half ago or something, to maybe have him go see what he can do on his own, sort of like fly from the nest, and what can Liquid do without him. And I think that would have been a very interesting storyline for North American Counter-Strike in particular, but didn't come to pass and probably never will now. It's almost like, Simple with Navi to some degree. It's like inexorable, not going to be able to take them apart. So I'm not sure. The yes man angle, I feel like, is going to plague this team forever. And I don't know, as a result, if Nitro will ever actually be deemed, not fitting the bar. You know what I mean? And that's the main thing that I think we're all observing is his fragging is too low. It's not consistently powerful enough. He doesn't even necessarily have a supreme clutch factor. Like sometimes he'll churn out the odd performance or the odd round of impact. But for the most part, like Paladin says, very rare to get multi-frags on an anchor. So like, imagine if major winning Navi didn't have Perfecto. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of thing we're talking about here.
It's tough. It's tough out there. I think, but this Liquid, it does feel like it's just seen the end of days, to be honest with you. And yeah, we're, again, like I say, the whole kind of community has been apologizing for the caliber of these players and hoping for better and better. And then when they get to sort of a playoff kind of level, they do disappoint. Again, though, you talked about the win at Katowice. They're very streaky. They're also a little bit. Just kind of proving that they do have it, but then falling flat, but then proving again. So it is weird. It is difficult to say how long do you stick with this. And is it, again, just sort of a fundamental issue of like the NA scene and will they be able to fix it by just bringing in someone new? And they'd also probably have to go pretty deep into the book of IGLs that are out there and again train someone up when it feels like they're maybe in the process of still training OC to play at the top level. So kind of a challenge, but I think still a fun time. I think that's going to do us for the ep, to be fair, lads. We've hit an hour and a half there, so I'm pretty happy with that personally. And really good episode talking things over. All things Counter-Strike 2, it's finally here. Glory all around. Very exciting. And I think that we have touched quite readily on what we want to expect from it, what the things we've seen might mean. I am just continually excited for the game, to be honest with you. And I look forward to getting to cast it, of course, which is
of course,
which is the big thing.
And as a closing point, if anybody ever wants a crash course in lighting, just point yourself at that wall. Can you tell there's a door there? Probably just barely. That's Counter-Strike 2.
All right, folks. Thank you very much for watching, and we will, of course, catch you next week.
You're going to love this video right here. You're going to love it. Check it out right now.